Welcome to Open Tables. With your hosts, Cynthia Sue Larson.
That it's okay for everybody to change. It's okay to let things go. And that's really powerful.
Christopher Anatra.
The universe is based on commerce. You know me as the quantum businessman.
Jerry Hicks.
I feel like I've woken up in a parallel dimension where everybody's exactly the same. They look the same memories generally speaking, but they're different.
And Shane Robinson.
Nobody has all the answers, so everybody's welcome to share their ideas, and it really expands our consciousness when we do that.
Open Tables. Unique perspectives for a new view of reality.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and it is an absolute honor and pleasure to have you guys here. I had to make sure I was unmuted there. We are apologizing for being late, ladies and gentlemen, as we had a very special reason. If you want to check out our Patreon in a day or two, you can find out yourself. Make sure you go over and subscribe for a very, very special video coming up. With that said, folks, I welcome you to IMEC Open Tables, a very, very special episode as we have Dr. Donald Hoffman with us today, a person that all of us are very excited to speak with. There we go. That's what I was looking for right there. Thank you, ma'am. IMEC Open Tables with your host, of course. Go ahead and jump to that, because before we do get started, we have a little bit of legality to go through. Wait for that to pop up on the screen real quick. There we go. And boom, there we are. The content you are about to watch is meant for thought and consideration. Please be respectful of each other and opinions shared. Please note, no copyright infringement is intended with regards to inclusion of short excerpts of material that are included in accordance with fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act. This is a safe space to express thoughts, ideas, opinions, and information. And it is so good to see every last one of you guys here in the chat. We're glad to have all of you guys here with us. And we're also very glad to have our team here with us today. I would like to bring the team in now. We have Miss Cynthia Sue Larson, our Vice President. I am the President, Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. Then we have our Secretary, Mr. Shane Robinson. And last but not least on the list, our treasurer, Mr. Christopher Anatra. Welcome, guys. So glad to have you here. How are you guys doing today?
Awesome. Really excited for the show.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and pull the screens back up now. We've got the team on board. Glad to have everybody here. Go ahead and jump there. We're going to go through the episode sponsors real quick, folks. We're going to fly through the opening of this show. We do apologize, but it is well worth the information we got coming up. Then it's going to be updates from myself, Cynthia, Shane, and Chris. We have a very special piece on the Golden Mandy's. Everybody will be able to go and choose who to elect for the Golden Mandy's, if you guys remember last year's show. So we will bring that up very briefly. Then Perceiving Reality with Dr. Donald Hoffman, an especially amazing episode we're all excited about, as we're all very, very big fans of Dr. Donald Hoffman's work here at IMEC. So we're going to finally end out with a live Q&A. So get those questions coming, folks, and we'll try to catch them. And at the end, we'll try to go through as many as possible. So let's go ahead and jump to the sponsors real quick, folks. And what do we have here, Cynthia?
We've got only one sponsor this month, but it's a good one. It was sent in by a fan and a viewer, and thank you so much for the contribution. This is a silky anteater, and the color, as you note, is gold. And the silk meat, this is a tiny little creature. These are not very big. They range in size, usually around 4 centimeters long. They weigh less than a pound. They're tiny. They're adorable, and they're nocturnal. And so what I think is so striking about this anteater is, number one, I've never heard of it before. Maybe I wouldn't have, because it's not here in North America, but it is just so cute. And it just seems like if there were anteaters that were this adorable, they would have been mentioned before.
And it's golden.
Yes, of course. So that's why we love it so much. It's golden. And obviously indicative for those of us who are tracking the golden timeline, looking at Lazarus species of plants and animals coming back, and sometimes just maybe popping into reality, like maybe this one did. If this is new for anybody who's watching now, you can comment in the live stream chat. They're found between southern Mexico to Brazil. Their diet consists mostly of ants. They consume between 100 to maybe 8,000 a day, and they don't live that long, just a couple years, but they're just really sweet looking.
And yet another golden animal on the golden timeline, as we seem to be tracking these things for the last couple of years. It's amazing to me just how many are coming out with this golden pigment. It's not statistically normal, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
It's beautiful. I've never heard of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and you would think too, like there'd be a Disney film or a cartoon or something that features like an adorable creature like that. So
give it a little time. We've seen them pop up in visions before after the fact, and it is adorable.
Yes. So
and over in the chat, Carlos Santen says, "Wow, I never knew they existed." Autumn Guild says, "That's adorable, isn't it? Though." Absolutely adorable, cutest little thing ever. And that is our sponsor for this week, folks. Told you we're going to fly through this one. Next up, we're going to go around. Cynthia, how have you been this last month? You did a great job, you and Shane, on holding up last month. I do so apologize. I had a prior commitment I had to tend to, but you guys did an amazing job. How you been this month?
Awesome. And then afterward, Shane and I got to chatting, or maybe it was before the show. Anyway, it contributed to the fact that we were running the show together. We had an idea. Let's get around to doing a little update on how I got through long COVID and the big question, what does China perhaps know that they're not saying? So we brought those two together, did a little video that you can see it either on Unbiased and on the Fence channel on YouTube or on my channel on YouTube. And it's worth watching because we provide tips that may be useful for everyone at this time to stay healthy, stay well.
That was an excellent show, by the way, Cynthia. I really, really enjoyed that a lot. Great conversation, guys. If you have a chance, definitely check it out. And she did that with Shane Robinson. Shane, how has your month been, my friend?
My month has been great, of course. Like Cynthia said, we did that, and we did it in a format that's shareable because we had to do it on YouTube. So it's great information that it really applies for everyone you can think of. It's a great tool to share right now. I've personally just been really busy with doing one-on-one sessions with people where I help people go within. And so I haven't done a lot on the channel. I did do a video recently about looking into the Mandela Effect deeper and to see what kind of messages you can get out of them, because I think it's an individual journey and we can all get fantastic messages. And I love reading the comments underneath. Cynthia left a great one about sort of what popped into your head as you were watching the video and where it led you. So that's sort of where I'm trying to go into now, is like realizing that random is only just our lack of understanding of it, but really there's something deeper going on. And when things move into our awareness, it isn't just an accident. And so that's where I'm having a lot of fun with it. It really makes life a big adventure when you can look at it like that. Like you were mentioning Easter eggs earlier. I don't know if that was live. It wasn't live, but yeah, life's like full of Easter eggs. So catch the Patreon if you want. I guess it's a shameless plug for our Patreon to see more about the Easter eggs. But that's it for me for an update.
All right, Shane, glad to have you along for the ride. Myself, this last month, we finished the Dark Wolf's Den radio show season 2, the State of Mystery series, where we went through every single state in the union, talking about cryptids and ghosts in every state. So all 50 states are done, folks. We finished season 2. We are taking a couple weeks off to build some special surprises for you guys. That's about all I can say right now. And we will be coming out with season 3 here in probably about another month or so, starting that back up. And we got some very, very special episodes for you guys coming up on the Dark Wolf Stint Show and Rippin' Rabbit Hole. And of course, IMEC, we're always working behind the scenes, trying to bring you guys great work. So just working with the team all month, getting ready and getting prepared for this amazing show we have today. And kind of taking a little time off in between seasons. That's pretty much where I'm at right now. And just been working a lot at other jobs outside of broadcasting. So it's been a fun month for me, but definitely got a lot of fun stuff planned for you guys coming up in the near future. And Mr. Christopher Anatra has been very busy on some very fun stuff too. How you doing, Mr. Chris?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I was like you, Jerry. I missed last month's show. With Chad from Open Your Reality. I kind of made up for it because since then I did 2 interviews with him on his channel that were really kind of twisted his mind a little bit about reading into some Mandela effects. One of the ones I think on the second interview was about the Hindenburg disaster and reading into that, because there's the big Mandela effect where it went from everyone died, 0 survivors, to now there's 62 survivors, which is pretty dramatic. Reading into what those things were. Going to be releasing at least another video soon. Chad gave me permission to post both those interviews on my YouTube channel, so those will be up in the next day or so. So if you want to watch those, you'll find those very interesting. And like all of us here, we're really excited to talk to Donald Hoffman. This is great. This is amazing. I've watched his videos for a long time, and he just brings so many interesting, progressive, scientific thoughts to understanding consciousness and reality that I think everybody watching the show today is just going to be like, wow. So
I second that. And one thing you've been working on over on the website is in the next slide here, if you don't mind, Heather. Do a great job behind the scenes. Applaud for Mrs. Heather, our producer. She does a wonderful job. Absolutely amazing. But the Golden Mandies, right? You've been working on getting this set up, sir?
Yeah, so we do have a page that will put the link in below this video to go to a site where people can vote for their favorites, and it's really important that people do that. And we're getting some really good ideas, but we'd like to keep that flow going. So definitely vote.
And this is the year of voting. Get out and vote for the politicians. Get out and vote for what you believe in, and get out and vote for the Mandies, the Golden Mandies, and you guys decide who gets the Golden Mandy this year and every year, of course. So we cannot wait to see what comes in from you guys. We're really, really excited. And we're also really, really excited, folks, to bring on our very, very special guest this month. Dr. Hoffman is a professor of cognitive sciences at UC Irvine. I was trying to think of this the other day, and all I could think it was Vine. I knew that wasn't right. I couldn't think of Irvine to save my life. I was trying to tell somebody about it. He is a professor of cognitive sciences there, the author of several books, including The Case Against Reality, Why Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes, Observer Mechanics, A Formal Theory of Perception, and Visual Intelligence, How We Create What We See. His website is listed on the screen here. I'm not going to go through that chain of letters. You guys can check it out yourself, and I'm sure it'll also be listed in the description box below. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce the one, the only Dr. Donald Hoffman. Are you there, good doctor?
Yes. Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for joining us here on IMEC. It is an absolute honor for all of us. As we've discussed back in the green room, we're all huge, huge fans of your work. So without any further ado, I'm going to let you get into it, pretty much give you the floor. My one question that I'd like to start on is, what is reality and what is consciousness?
Right. So in science, for several centuries, we've assumed that space and time were the fundamental reality. Under Newton, it was space and time separately. And then since Einstein, it's been the union of space and time into what we call space-time. And that assumption has been incredibly powerful, right? All of the modern science and the technology that's allowing us to talk to each other right now is a result of the wonderful science that's been done, assuming that space and time are fundamental. So it's been an incredibly powerful framework. But there's always been a tension. Many spiritual traditions have long said that space and time are not fundamental. And here's science saying space and time are fundamental, and coming up with all this technology, and the religions are not, or the spiritual traditions are not. But now science, in the last 20 years or so, 30 years, is really shifting gears. We now know that space-time cannot be fundamental, and that's a real big deal, right? To go from space-time is fundamental to realizing that space and time, or their union into space-time, cannot be fundamental is a fundamental shift. And we know that because our best scientific theories tell us that, right? So when you take, I'll give you two examples of the kinds of theories and why they say space-time cannot be fundamental. The first is within physics, it's quantum field theory and Einstein's theory of gravity together tell us that space-time cannot be fundamental. And the reason for this is that quantum theory tells us that if we want to measure something precisely, the more precise we want to get the measurement, the finer the resolution we want to get, resolve smaller and smaller details, you're going to need a higher and higher frequency light or some kind of energy source that has higher and higher frequencies. Well, quantum theory tells us that as you increase the frequency, the energy goes up, right? So higher frequencies mean higher energy. So it's going to take more and more energy to probe smaller and smaller scales of space and time. Well, that would be fine in a world without gravity. You could just, as long as you had the power source, right? Get a big power source, then you can make finer and finer frequencies with higher and higher energies, no problem. So you just keep measuring smaller. But when you get gravity spoils the whole party, because Einstein tells us that energy and mass are equivalent. So as you get that energy into a smaller and smaller region of space that you're trying to measure, you're effectively putting more and more mass into a smaller and smaller region of space. And at some point, gravity says, okay, and collapses the whole thing into a black hole, and you destroy the very thing that you're trying to measure. So what that means is that the very notion of space makes no operational sense. There is no operational meaning for it beyond a certain scale, a small scale. And it turns out it's around 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, which from my point of view isn't that far down. I mean, if it was 10 to the minus 33 trillion centimeters, I would be very impressed with space-time. But 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, that means you don't have to go very far before the whole space-time framework comes to the end of its abilities. It stops, it halts. So what the physicists are not saying is that space-time has pixels at that scale. They're not saying that. You can't actually make pixels be Lorentz invariant in any obvious way. So they're not saying that. What they're saying instead is that the very notion of space and time have no operational meaning as you try to go to smaller scales. They're meaningless. There's no concrete meaning. And by the way, in terms of time, is 10 to the minus 43 seconds. So 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, 10 to the minus 43 seconds, that's where space-time stops. So it was pretty clear. I mean, what can you say? Space-time was doomed. But that's what they say, by the way. Ed Witten, who is at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, has said space-time was doomed. Nima Arkani Hamed says space-time is doomed. He's also a brilliant researcher at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. And others. David Gross, who won the Nobel Prize, says space-time is doomed. And others are very, very clear. Ed Witten basically said everybody in string theory thinks it's over for space-time. We're looking for something deeper. So that's one argument for it. Another argument from quantum theory is simply that when you measure something, you have to have a measuring device, which is a physical device. So it's a quantum system. It satisfies the laws of quantum mechanics. Well, that means that to get more precise measurements, you need what we call degrees of freedom, more complexity in the quantum measurement system itself. So if I have a room here and I've got an electron, I'm trying to measure its position or its momentum or something like with high precision. As I want to get more and more precision, I've got this measuring device in my room, and it's going to have more and more complexity, more and more degrees of freedom to get more and more detailed resolution. Well, again, gravity spoils the party. As soon as you get more and more degrees of freedom, enough degrees of freedom in that measuring device, it collapses into a black hole. And so what that means is, remarkably, there are no local observables anywhere in space-time, which is truly stunning. So space-time, we're really seeing that there are these fundamental limits. Space-time has been a wonderful framework, but now quantum theory and gravity together tell us that it cannot be fundamental. But those theories don't tell the scientists what the next step is. What is beyond space-time? If space-time isn't fundamental, what is? The theories are wonderful by telling us space-time goes so far, but no further. But then it's dark. How do we go into the darkness beyond space-time and try to come up with theories? And we can talk about that, but many physicists are now.
So the science is incomplete then.
Oh, absolutely. And we can talk about it. Science will always be necessarily incomplete, but it's always, the next generation of young scientists is always eager to overthrow what the previous generation did and come up with new and deeper things. And so right now there are many physicists that we can talk about who are finding new structures beyond space and time, and something called the amplitude-hedron, cosmological polytope, and associahedron, and so forth. So we can talk about that. But I wanted to mention another aspect of science that's telling us that space-time cannot be fundamental, and that's evolution by natural selection. Surprisingly. And that's work that I and some of my colleagues, my students and collaborators have been working on. And what we asked was the question, assuming that we evolved and were shaped by natural selection, what is the probability that our sensory systems are showing us truths about reality? I see a car. Does that mean that the car is really, I'm seeing the truth? The car's shape and color and so forth is the true description of something that would be there even if I didn't look. I look at the moon, I see the moon, and you see the moon, and we both agree we see the moon. Our sense is telling us the truth. We tend to assume, yes. Even Einstein said, do you really think the moon isn't there when no one's looking? We're talking about quantum theory. He asked that question of Abraham Pais. And so we tend to think that our senses are showing us not all of the truth. No one thinks we see all of the truth, but what we do see is enough of the truth that we need. And an argument that we tend to give from evolution is to say, well, look, if you're competing with other creatures for resources, and you have better perceptions than them, more accurate perceptions than them, then surely you'll win in the competition. Feeding, fighting, fleeing, and mating. You'll win in that competition if you have better and more accurate senses. That seems just obvious that that's going to be the case. And again, it's not that you're going to see everything truly, but that you will, whatever you need to survive, you'll see that more truly. That's the idea. Well, I decided with my graduate students now 12, 13 years ago, we decided it's a technical question. Evolution by natural selection is a mathematically precise theory. It's called evolutionary game theory, evolutionary graph theory. So we don't have to wave our hands and say, oh, I bet that it will. You don't have to worry about that. You can just go run the simulations and prove theorems. And the remarkable response is the probability is 0 that any sensory system of any organism has ever been shaped to see any aspect of the structure of reality, truly.
So we don't really perceive reality as the true nature of reality is. Is that what you're saying?
That's what the theory of evolution by natural selection is saying. I don't know the answer here, but what I'm saying is that as a scientist, what I do is I say, this is what our best theories tell us. Maybe our theories are wrong, but right now we don't have any better theories. So as a scientist, I have to take these theories very seriously, mathematically seriously, right? Mathematically precisely, and see what they say. And these theories are telling us, the physicists are telling us that their branch of science says space-time is doomed. And now I'm saying that evolution by natural selection agrees that space-time and physical objects, which we thought were the truth, not all the truth, but true. It turns out it's more like a user interface. And that's what it seems like what's going on in evolution, right? So if you're playing a video game, like Grand Theft Auto, but let's think about Grand Theft Auto in virtual reality. So you got a headset on and maybe a bodysuit and so forth, and you're looking around. Well, I look to my right and I see a red Ferrari. Well, is there really a red Ferrari that I'm interacting with? Well, no, not really. What I'm interacting with is some supercomputer somewhere, right, that I can't see. And there's diodes and resistors and voltages and magnetic fields and lots of software. That's in this metaphor, the reality. And it's really complicated. I don't see any of that. And I don't even need to know about it. I don't have to know anything about the software or the supercomputer. All I need to know is how to use my virtual reality interface. And if I know how to use that interface, then I can play the game, which is, in fact, changing the state of the computer systematically in ways I need to change the state of the computer to win the game. But I don't know about that. And that's the idea. Evolution is telling us that we were shaped by natural selection to play the game of life successfully. And to do that, we were given a virtual reality interface that hides the truth. We don't need to know the truth. We don't need to know what reality is. We just need to have an interface that lets us act adaptively. So everything that we see, space and time and physical objects, are merely a user interface, a virtual reality to play the game of life. That's what evolution by natural selection is telling us. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's true. As a scientist, all I can say is these are our best theories. We have no better theories, and this is what our best theories tell us. Quantum theory with gravity tells us space-time is doomed, and evolution by natural selection tells us that space-time is doomed, and think about it instead as like a user interface to a different reality. But evolution by natural selection also doesn't tell us what's behind the interface, right? It just says space and time isn't it. It's just a user interface, and there's something behind. And so now it's up to scientists to propose new theories of what's behind. And so this is a fun time. It's shaking up deeply held beliefs, right? We all knew that space-time is fundamental, and we knew that the moon is there when no one looks. Now we don't know that. And we knew that physics was about what happens in space and time. Now we don't know that. We don't know what physics is about. I mean, physics is real. It's about something, but it's about something deeper than space and time. And the younger generation of physicists is of course having a great time with this, right? That's every younger generation, but they get to be iconoclastic and move deeper and probe further. And that's what science is all about. So they're finding new structures beyond space and time. And these, I'll just mention a couple that they're finding. So there's Nima Arkani Hamed, who's at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, and a number of his collaborators they've discovered this geometric structure. It's what's called a polytope. It's like a polygon that you would see in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, but now in multiple dimensions. It could be in very, very high number of dimensions. So it's like a polygon, but in very, very high dimensional space. And it turns out that this polytope, called the amplituhedron, allows them to do something that they couldn't do before. So at the Large Hadron Collider and other colliders, you take particles and smash them together at high speeds and look what comes out. And it's sometimes described as trying to figure out what a car is made up of by taking 2 cars and smashing them into each other and seeing a fender pop off here and a wheel pop off there, and then trying to figure out what a car is made of. But that's what we have to do with these particles, is smash them together at high speeds and then see what sprays out, and then try to put the pieces back together into a picture of what's going on in these particles. Well, so it turns out that the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, is doing millions or even perhaps billions of these collisions per second, and they most of the collisions they know about, but they can compute them and let them go away. So they don't need to really study them. Like sometimes these things called gluons, 2 gluons smash in and 4 gluons go spraying out, and they understand that. Now here's the kicker. when you do the computation for these probabilities, what they call amplitudes, for what happens when 2 gluons go smashing in and 4 gluons go spraying out, what's the probability of that? Well, to compute the probability is literally billions of terms, hundreds of pages of math for just one collision. And so when you're trying to do millions or billions of these and find them and get rid of them at a collider, you can't be doing billions of terms of computation for each. So back in the early 80s, the experimental physicists were saying to the theoretical physicists, please, simpler formulas. Can you make this simpler? And in 1986, two physicists Park and Taylor discovered this unbelievable formula. It took the billions of terms and it reduced it to one term. And people are going, where did that come from? It was like a pointer. There's something really interesting going on, and they didn't understand it. And then they thought maybe that's a one-off. But then over the next couple decades, they found, well, next few years, they found, actually a couple decades, they found more of these. And then finally, in 2013, they came up with this structure, Nima Arkani Hamed and his collaborators, called the amplitude, which sort of puts many of these results together. And what they found is, basically, when you let go of space-time, you find these new structures beyond space-time that are true of the data. They actually tell you the correct scattering amplitudes, the correct scattering probabilities. But what's interesting is, by letting go of space-time, all of a sudden the math becomes much, much simpler. Now, of course, if you looked at the math, you wouldn't say it's simple, right? And I don't say it's simple. This is difficult math, but it's not billions of terms. It's one term, for example, and the 2 gluons in, 4 gluons out. So the math gets much simpler, although any mortal would say it's not simple. And also they discovered that the math beyond space-time, the structures beyond space-time, are finding new symmetries that are true of the scattering events, but you really can't see that symmetry in space-time. So we have all these hints now that, well, first we know that space-time is doomed. I mean, well, put it this way. We know that our best theories that we currently have tell us that space-time is doomed. Again, that's just what the theories tell us. We don't know what the truth is, but I'm working on that assumption right now. Space-time is doomed. And we have these new theories just since 2013 that are telling us these are the kinds of structures that we're finding beyond space-time. Now, they're just sitting there. There's no dynamics in these structures. They're just sitting there, and the volumes of these structures are telling us the probabilities of these collisions or these scattering events. And the facet structure, how there's this face and there's this edge, and that whole structure turns out to give you what we call Lorentz invariance, and well, properties of them gives you Lorentz invariance and what we call in quantum theory unitarity. So it's all captured in the volumes and facet structure and so-called some canonical forms on these structures that give you the Lorentz invariance. Anyway, these structures beyond space-time are giving us everything that we know and love in space-time, but it's beyond space-time. So there is no space and time. There is no quantum theory. By the way, quantum theory itself is not fundamental. This is so, and the physicists like Nima Arkani Hamed are very, very explicit that they're looking for structures not only beyond space-time but beyond quantum theory, and have space-time and quantum theory emerge together, joined at the hip from a deeper theory. So what's really exciting is, this has only been the last 15 years that we've found these. Really begin to understand these structures beyond space-time, and science it's hard to imagine how big this is. Science has been, since Newton at least, about what happens in space and time. That's what science has been about, and that's been the one of the big fights between science and spirituality. Is that for millennia, many spiritual traditions have said space and time are wonderful, but there's a lot of treasure beyond space and time. There's lots of stuff beyond space and time, and science just had no way to go there. We in some sense we had to cut our chops on space-time itself to really understand space and time and physical objects inside space and time, and science has done a great job on that. And now, having done that, our own theories are telling us space-time is not it. It's just a headset. It's a VR. There's something deeper beyond, and we can use the tools of science. We don't have to just throw up our hands and say, well, space-time isn't it? Oh, oy vey, no, well, that's the end of science. No. In some sense, it's just the beginning of the next phase of scientific exploration. So I've been going on for a long time. I should maybe stop and let you.
Well, to kind of connect to what you were just saying about the VR headset, in your research, it's almost like you have to somehow get out of the game to come up with something that you can quantify or to put it in a formula and have some sort of scientific method. Is there any way to sort of project or get out of or eliminate the fact that we're in the game, if you will, to take a better look at it? I know that, some people say meditation can take you out of it or give you greater insight, but how do you overcome this problem? Since it was kind of the last thing you ended on there.
Well, very, very, very good. So that's an important question, because there are definite limits to our imagination. So, for example, if I ask you, try to imagine a new color that you've never seen before. Right? Nothing happens.
Yeah.
I try to think and nothing happens. It's just like, and I'm asking a very simple thing. Just think of one new color that you've never seen before. Just imagine. You can't do it. So there are deep limits to our imagination, right? So now meditation, I agree, is a way, and I do meditate on a daily basis. It's a way to escape preconceptions, to let go of clinging to space and time and so forth. And so, but even in meditation, I've not experienced a new color I've never seen before. I think maybe some people have. I haven't. But they're out there. I think there are colors that we've never seen. And by the way, we know that that's the case. Or we have good evidence that that's the case. There are women who have, instead of just the 3-cone photoreceptors that most of us have, they have 4. These are called tetrafems. Kimberly Jameson, who's a PhD and a researcher here at UC Irvine, has done a lot of research on this. Really interesting. She can give you a blood test or something to find out if you're a tetrafem. And she's done tests on these tetrafems and got good evidence that they see a new dimension of colors that the rest of us don't see. So just like about 7% of men are colorblind. So then so it's a large number of men. 7% are colorblind. They're missing, say, a red cone in many cases, and so they can't make discriminations between red and green that the rest of us can make. So they're missing like a whole dimension of color experiences that the rest of us have. And if you ask these men to imagine red, well, they're in the same position when I ask you to imagine a new color. So these women, these tetrafems, are experiencing colors that no man can imagine, and probably most women are not tetrafems. So most women can't imagine them either. So, but there are these women that have them. And then there are other animals, like pigeons have 4 color receptors. Maybe pigeons are living in a much richer color world than any humans except the tetrafems. So we know that our imagination, the long answer to your question, but we know that we need helps to our imagination, and we know that there are things beyond what we can currently imagine. So yes, meditation does help to break down the barriers and to open us up, to loosen us up from our preconceptions to think in new ways. But even there, we have tight bounds on how free. It was hard for us to think outside of space and time, and that's where science also gives us a tool. What the physicists are doing is they're using mathematics is their flashlight into the dark beyond space-time. And in the work I'm doing on consciousness as well, so I'm working on a model of consciousness we can talk about later. And once again, sure, there are intuitions, but ultimately it's the mathematics that's guiding. And even within the last day, the mathematics of my own theory has taught me something brand new about consciousness. So and that's how science works, is we want to take the insights, and many insights from spiritual traditions are important insights, but they've not been made precise, right? We haven't had the Einstein who can, make them precise. And so that's what these physicists are doing. They're getting insights of things beyond space-time. But then they're saying, let's take those insights and make them mathematically precise.
I've got a question for you, Dr. Hoffman, it's about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural world. That's been said about this flashlight that the physicists are using, and I love the way you're describing that. So if it's true that there is this magical kind of a beam of focal awareness that we can bring to a problem thanks to mathematics and looking for elegance, the things you're describing here today, what are your thoughts on just the fact that it does seem like there's almost it's been called an unreasonable effectiveness? Like some people say, well, that just proves we're in a simulation and there's somebody creating all this behind the scenes. What are your thoughts on all that?
Right. And a lot there. One of the deepest, perhaps arguably the deepest work of any scientist or mathematician is the work of Kurt Gödel, something he did in 1930, 1931, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And it's about mathematics. And what Gödel showed is that if you have any mathematical system that, for example, is good enough to do arithmetic, it's sophisticated enough to do arithmetic, so you've got some mathematical system. He showed that there's always a statement that you can show is true. It's a mathematical statement, is true mathematical statement, and it cannot be proven within your mathematics. And if you add that statement into your mathematics, say, okay, well, I'm just going to take it as an axiom. Okay, so that thing that you know is true but couldn't be proven, well, okay, we can't prove it. Let's make it an axiom. Now it's part of our basic system. Then Gödel says, well, I got another one for you. Here's another statement that's true but can't be proven within your new, bigger system. And it's always going to be the case. In other words, there's no end to the exploration of mathematical structure. So that's the first thing. The mathematics, in some sense, you cannot be omniscient about mathematics. There's no end to the exploration of mathematical structure. Now, in terms of the question of the unreasonable effectiveness, Eugene Wigner pointed, the physicist who said that. And it's been truly stunning. I mean, ever since, roughly Galileo, when Galileo said, look, you got to get mathematical or you're not going to get anywhere, basically. The language of God of the universe is mathematics. And as we started to do that, we just found, wow, the reason we can send probes to the moon and to planets and so forth is we have the mathematics. Without that, good luck. You'll be crashing stuff and burning stuff and it won't work. But with the mathematics, and precisely that mathematics, right? You got to get it to the 10th decimal place in some cases to have this thing work. Then things will work. So there's something really going on with mathematics. The stuff I'm doing right now is saying, let's think about consciousness as fundamental. And consciousness is the only reality.
This is where I would like to step in, actually, because that has been something that I have theorized, I guess you'd say, for quite a while. I'm not a math guy. I can come up with ideas all day. I can't prove a thing, which is why I'm glad we've got people like you out there that know how to use the chalkboard that I can't use. So with that said, consciousness, I would love to go ahead and get onto this topic now. We're told by fundamental scientists, that consciousness is just a happy side effect of the brain. It's just, all the electrics and all the neurons, they just happen to make consciousness, which I believe they would make robots if that's the case. I don't think we would have our own version of consciousness. But what is your opinion on this, Doc?
Well, I'm good friends with many of the people who are studying this as what we call the hard problem of consciousness, trying to understand how physical systems like brains and neurons, or even silicon circuits and AI, artificial intelligences, might give rise to conscious experiences. And I'm good friends with many of the people that are working on this. And in fact, I'll be next week giving a talk at a conference where quantum physicists and cognitive neuroscientists are all getting together and talking about this. And I plan to say very, very precisely why none of those approaches can work, that space and time are not fundamental. Physical objects in space and time are not fundamental. Space-time is doomed. So any theory of consciousness that starts with something in space and time and tries to boot up consciousness from it, say the brain or circuits of artificial intelligence, is doomed to fail. They cannot succeed because space and time itself doesn't exist when it's not perceived. Physical objects don't persist. They don't even exist when they're not perceived. When Einstein asked a quantum, in terms of quantum theory, do you really think the moon is there or is not there when no one looks? Right? Einstein didn't like the idea that maybe the moon isn't there when you don't look, and you, in some sense, you create it when you look. Well, that's what we're seeing. The technical term for that is called local realism or non-contextual realism. The idea that do things exist and have real properties when they're not perceived? And the answer is very, very clear. Einstein was wrong. Local realism is false. Non-contextual realism is false. Those things don't exist. Space and time itself doesn't exist when it's not perceived. And if we could, maybe this would be a good time for me to show that. I have three little slides, and this might be a good way to just make that idea, which seems so weird, a little bit more concrete, just to see what I'm talking about. So if you look at this slide, and you're seeing it on a screen somewhere, so your screen is flat. But if you look at this, you're seeing something that's not flat, right? You're probably seeing a cube. It's called the Necker cube, after a guy who first sort of wrote this down back in the 1800s, who drew this thing. So you can see that, and if you look at it, it looks three-dimensional, but it also looks like it flips back and forth. Can you see it flip sometimes? One face is in front. So if we go to the next slide, sometimes that face looks like it's in front. But if we go to the next slide, sometimes that other face looks like it's in front, right? And so now if I ask you, okay, when you're not looking at the screen, which face is in front? Which of those two faces, and so which cube are you seeing? Which cube is there when you don't look? Well, the answer is neither, because in fact, there's no cube. When you don't look, there isn't a cube, right? But when you look, you're taking a flat image that you're seeing on your screen, and you're popping out a three-dimensional object. So you're popping out all the lines that you see, you're seeing the cube, but notice also you're creating the volume of empty space inside the cube as well. So don't just focus on the lines, focus on, whoa, there's a huge, substantial volume of empty space that I just created there as well. So you're creating the objects, you're also creating the space. So you're the creator of, so what I'm saying is, what's true of the cube is true of your body. It's true of the moon. Every object in space and time is something that you construct no less than you construct that cube. So that's what I mean when I say you construct everything that you see inside space and time. And so that's what physics is now coming to. It's basically saying you construct everything inside space and time. So the cube is not there when you don't perceive it. It's only there when. Now, here's what I say to my colleagues now about consciousness arising from the brain. The brain doesn't exist when it's not perceived. Neurons do not exist when they're not perceived, just like that cube does not exist. So you create neurons when you look. Neurons do not create you. Neurons do not create your consciousness. Neurons themselves are symbols, experiences that you create when you look. So now you might say, well, but hey, if they're getting good theories that work, doesn't that prove you're wrong, right? If they're showing how the neurons and neural activity and neural dynamics is creating conscious experiences, then that surely shows that this is wrong, that neurons are actually doing it. Well, it turns out, and this is something that I say at every conference where I give a talk on this, I say, and this is nothing personal. These are my good friends. I love them. These are wonderful, brilliant, well-meaning people, and many of them are very, very good friends and have been for many, many years. But the next time I see Stuart Hameroff on stage he's got a theory about neuronal microtubules and the quantum collapse of certain electronic states in these microtubules, orchestrated collapse. Last time I was on stage with him, I said, okay, great idea, Stuart. and with Roger Penrose as well. They're co-authors on this. I said, great. So give me the orchestrated collapse of microtubular quantum states. That is the taste of chocolate, or whatever. So which experience can you explain? Give me. I'm just asking for one. I mean, we're scientists here, right? We would like data. So what is the claim that you're making? What is the orchestrated collapse for whatever? And Stuart can't do it. And then with Giulio Tononi at another conference, two conferences, one back in the 90s and then one just a couple of years ago. I asked Giulio the very same. So what is the integrated information that must be the smell of a lemon, that could not be the smell of a rose? Or can you give me one? And I asked him just in person, backstage a few years ago at a conference, and he told me that he couldn't do a single one, and they haven't published a single one. And this is true of every physicalist theory of consciousness. They have these good, they're brilliant theories. They're doing their best because they're assuming that space and time are fundamental, and that consciousness is a product of neural activity or physical systems more generally. And under those assumptions, they're doing unbelievably beautiful work. They're doing the best they can, but as smart as they are, and many of them have IQs that I can't even understand. These are really, really smart people. But if you start with assumptions that are false, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you can't win, and that's the problem. So we now know that all these approaches to try to boot up consciousness from physical systems cannot work, because those physical systems, space and time itself, is not fundamental. So they have powers.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you've made a breakthrough recently with your team, and I don't mean, maybe you can only say so much before it gets published, and I understand that. So we do respect that. But you mentioned that there's an aspect of qualia that it can be collectively experienced, and this is an area that I love the way that you're making progress in this area. So if anything you can say would be greatly.
Oh, certainly. And I've got tenure, and I don't care about people beating me to publication anymore. So in fact, I'm going to be talking about this next week before we publish any papers to all of my, my good friends who are doing these neurobiological theories of consciousness next week. I'll be telling them about this. I got permission from my team. I've got tenure, but some of them don't, and so I get permission from them first for this. But so we have a theory of consciousness in which consciousness is not a product of space and time. It's not something that neurons create or that silicons. It's fundamental. So it's a theory in which we take consciousness not to be an emergent property of a physical system, but something that is in fact deeper than space and time, so deeper than current physics. And in that, so it's a mathematically precise theory. We have a technical term that we call a conscious agent. And if anybody who's listening wants to see the mathematics, if you just Google my name, Donald Hoffman, and the paper is called Objects of Consciousness, that'll get you there. So if you just Google Objects of Consciousness and my name, you can see the math. And then you can see the work that we've done later on that builds on that math. So it's a mathematical model of consciousness, which I don't claim to be correct. In fact, I would bet against me, right? So right. In fact, I would say no theory in science is the theory of everything. Not so far, right? And there cannot be a theory of everything for principled reasons.
And true science welcomes scrutiny, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. And a true scientist understands that our best theories, which are incredibly wonderful gifts to humanity. Every scientific theory is a wonderful gift to humanity, but it's never the theory of everything. Because every scientific theory says, if you grant me these assumptions, and you spell out the assumptions, then I'll explain all this wonderful stuff. But you don't explain your assumptions. And if you get a deeper scientific theory that explains those assumptions, it makes its own new assumption.
Give us one miracle and we'll take it from there.
That's exactly right. And those assumptions, assumption is a very nice clinical term, but those are the miracles. The assumptions are the miracles of the theory. And so what science is telling us is, first, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. It is worthwhile to do these mathematically precise theories. There's some reason for them to be unreasonably effective. And I'll give you my ideas in a moment why I think they are. But also there's a deep humility that we have to have, which is our best scientific theories will always just be the next baby step. We'll always be taking the next baby step. And Gödel, with his incompleteness theorem, tells us that this is principled, that even just mathematical reality, if you were just looking at mathematical reality, the exploration of that is endless. So the reality of consciousness, which I think transcends the mathematical reality in the following sense, I think that consciousness is fundamental, and that mathematics is like the bones of the organic consciousness, right? So think of consciousness as this living organism, and we're trying to get a mathematical model of it, and the math is just the bones. So there are other brilliant thinkers like Max Tegmark, a brilliant physicist, who has the idea. He says that mathematics itself is the fundamental nature of reality, and he goes on to come up with what he calls his level 4 multiverse idea of the universe based on that. Everything that's mathematically possible is real. And so he gets a what he calls a level 4 multiverse. And I'm saying something different. I'm saying that consciousness is fundamental, but that consciousness itself is not unstructured. There is a structure to consciousness. And we've known this for a long time, actually. There's a field called psychophysics that a guy named Fechner started in around 1860 or something like that. So it's been around for 122 years or something like that. And what we've discovered in psychophysical studies, which involves careful experiments and the mathematical models of the experiments, conscious experiences are highly structured. Like that cube I showed you. There, we can write down lots of mathematics which describe the structure of the cube. And in virtual reality games, when you put on a virtual reality headset and you're in a 3D world, how does it work that you're able to see everything moving around in this beautiful 3D world? It's all mathematics. It's perspective projection and these matrix manipulations that they're using, or geometric algebra manipulations. So the reason we have these VR headsets and games that work so much, and we immerse you in visual worlds that are so compelling, is because we know the mathematics of all these experiences that you're having. We can write down the mathematics. We know how to transform things mathematically. That's why VR works. So the reason why we can put you into these experiential worlds of all these new experiences that you're having is because we have the mathematics that underlies the experiences. So there's not a divorce between conscious experience and mathematics. They're like the bones and the living organism. The math is the bones. And that's why I think there's this unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in sciences more generally, because what science is really studying, we find, is consciousness. If consciousness is fundamental, what we're really studying, what we've done in space-time is we've really been studying a virtual reality headset that some conscious agents use. There are infinitely many headsets that conscious agents could use to interact with other conscious agents. Space and time, 3 dimensions of space, a dimension of time put together. That's just one headset, but there are many, many, many others. And that may not be a particularly sophisticated one. We may be fairly low on the totem pole in terms of the headsets that we enjoy.
And with these mathematics, you've recently made a mathematical breakthrough. Is that right? Something you can break here on the show for the first time?
Sure, I can talk about it. It's a technical question that people studying consciousness from certain points of view have had for a long time. It's called the combination problem. If you have 2 consciousnesses or 2 conscious experiences, how do you combine them? How do you combine selves? How do you combine consciousnesses? And how do you combine experiences to get new experiences? So like taking red and green and putting them together to get yellow, for example, in a an additive color mixture. In subtractive, you would just get brown, but in an additive color mixture, you get yellow. So how do new experiences get creative out of combinations of old experiences. And so the mathematics that my team and I have been working on, so I should just mention Chetan Prakash, Manish Singh, Robert Prentner, Chris Fields, and others. We've been helped with by Federico Fagin, the guy who invented the microprocessor. He was involved. He's been involved, and he funded our research and gave us lots of wonderful ideas as well. So I mean, so it's not just me. There's this whole team, and there are others Bruce Bennett that I haven't mentioned. So the mathematics that we've evolved. I was looking at that mathematics just yesterday, looking at this combination problem, and it actually showed me how conscious agents in their interactions they automatically flow toward a conscious agent that actually fuses and unifies the separate conscious agents. So there's actually a drive in the mathematics, which was stunning to me. So I didn't know that until yesterday, that there was a drive toward fusion. So the agents, we have these two separate conscious agents with their separate experiences, and we can write them down as formally one agent. So there's a formal, but they're just sort of sitting there side by side, but they're not really one. But they satisfy the definition of being one agent, but it's not terribly interesting. It's what we call it, a tensor product or something. It's not interesting. It's real, but it's not. But what I found was once you start them interacting, those two then go along almost all the time. There are special exceptions which are interesting as well, but most of the time, when you start them off interacting, they will move, their dynamics moves until they fuse and they form a single agent and they can fuse their experiences, their conscious experiences into new kinds of conscious experiences. So that's just that, and that's where, even though I was one of the researchers who was involved in making the mathematics, I now became the student of my own mathematics. And that's the interesting, and that is a really important lesson that we learn from science. And so here's where science and spirituality can really learn from each other, right? Spirituality has been telling science for thousands of years, or telling all of us, science more recently, but telling all of us, there's more than just space and time. Science is now catching up on that. But what spiritual traditions have not had is this wonderful gift of mathematical precision that we learned, starting with, say, around with Galileo, that if you get mathematically precise, you can take your intuitions, spell them out with a rigorous precision, and then you become the student. You learn. So in other words, it's giving the insights that we get from spiritual traditions, giving them the attention that they really deserve, making them absolutely precise so that we can really become their students. They become more than just words. They become teachers. And so that's the way I see this dynamic between science and spirituality going, is that they both have different pieces of the puzzle. Science has been sharpening its tools just studying our headset. We thought it was the whole ball of wax. We thought it was the theory of everything. No, it's just a theory of one headset. But good job. You really have done a good job understanding that headset. But now your theories are telling you it's just a headset and there's something beyond the headset. I'm proposing it's consciousness. And I'm proposing, consciousness 1.0 model. And it'll be wrong. Will it be 2.0, 3.0, 10.0? I hope to see 100.0 before I die. I'd love to see, how this thing evolves. So it's not that my theory is the right one. I'm just saying, here's a model of consciousness. And already with Newton, we can send rockets to the moon. How cool is that? Even though we know that even the way that Newton is thinking about space and time is just wrong. I mean, Einstein tells us that's the wrong way to think about space and time. Yet there's something good that we got from Newton, and many problems we still do with Newton. When we step outside of space-time and we get this new mathematics of beyond space-time, that doesn't mean that we're going to throw away evolution by natural selection and quantum field theory and Einstein's gravity, all these theories that are inside space-time. No, they're prized possessions. They're incredible gems that science has given to us, and we will use them where appropriate, but they will understand this larger framework outside of space-time, maybe in terms of conscious agents that I'm working on. that the space-time stuff is a special case. And then we'll go beyond my conception, and there'll be even larger and larger frameworks, and this will go on ad infinitum for the reasons I gave earlier. In principle, we can never have a theory of everything. But in practice, we would be fools not to be as precise as we can be and try to get the next theory. It's only when you're precise. So I'll give you a concrete example. Michael Faraday, and we talked about this a little bit just before we got on. Brilliant experimental physicist who spent decades studying magnets and electricity with wires and so forth, and just incredibly precise, beautiful experiments, brilliant stuff. And after all that was done, then James Clerk Maxwell, a British mathematical physicist, looked carefully at what Faraday had done and realized he could summarize all of it in just a few equations that we call Maxwell's equations. And now today with mathematics called geometric algebra, we can actually summarize it all into a single equation, the Maxwell equation. So there is one Maxwell equation that you can write down that captures all of the Maxwell's equations using geometric algebra. But those equations, so we went from playing with magnets and wires, right, and frog legs twitching, to these equations, and those equations were the foundation for all the modern technology, right? Here we are talking across hundreds of miles, maybe thousands of miles from each other, and understanding. In 1800, this would have seemed like paranormal stuff that we're, for me to say, oh, I'll talk with you, I'll know what you're thinking, even though you're 100 miles away from me. Sounds paranormal. Well, no, it's just technology once you understand mathematically what's going on. So that's how I see going on as we get to ideas beyond space-time. And here, when we're talking about consciousness being fundamental, now there's a real interaction between science and spirituality. I mean, I spend a lot of time listening to talks from spiritual traditions. Again, just like the way I listen to talks from science, I don't take anything as the gospel. I don't take anything as the truth, the final word. I just listen and say, this is the best ideas that we have so far. These are the best thoughts that we have so far. How can we make them precise? And which ideas can we toss out right away? Which ideas do we know already that doesn't float? Then take the ones that we haven't been able to dismiss yet, make them precise. That's how we give them the attention that they're due. Give them the respect that they're due, to really ask, what does that, when I say this, what do I really mean? And make it mathematically precise. Just to give you a concrete example, Einstein, when he was thinking about gravity, he tells us that he had what he called the happiest thought of his life. I think it was around 1906 or 1907, somewhere. When he was thinking about, if I was in an elevator and I was standing on a scale, and I weigh whatever I weigh, 150 pounds, or whatever like that. And then all of a sudden the elevator, the cord breaks and the elevator's in free fall. How much would I weigh? And Einstein realized, I would weigh nothing. I would weigh nothing. And that was the key insight that prompted him to move on. But it took him several years. It was not until 1915. So several years later, and he had to learn all this math. So he learned a ton of math. He had all sorts of sleepless nights, pulled his hair out, trying to turn his one little idea. If I was standing on that scale, I would be weightless if the elevator fell. And by the way, he's not some dummy like Hoffman. He's Einstein. So he's working on this, for several years, and he finally comes up with the equation. And so that's what we need to do, right? Einstein gave his idea the attention it deserved until he finally wrote down an equation, and he published the equation. And a year later, a German genius who happened to be on the front lines, I think, in World War I, and he was doing this stuff while he was on the front lines. How he could concentrate, I don't know. He discovered a solution to Einstein's equation, something we now call a black hole. Well, Einstein didn't know about black holes. He didn't like it. He didn't believe in them for a long, long time. He tried. So here, Einstein's theory came back and was the teacher, and Einstein was the student. He became a student of his own theory. And that's, so in spiritual traditions, that's what we've been missing. We've had good pointers, right? So various spiritual teachers have given us great pointers. But those pointers, we haven't had a way to make them precise and evolve the pointers and get ever better and deeper pointers. And so that's where science and spirituality can really interact. We can use the insights from spirituality and, of course, the insights and this rigor of clear theories and then careful experimental tests from science. And that's how we break out of dogmatism, scientific dogmatism or spiritual dogmatism, right? Scientists are people like anybody else. Scientists are, any scientist is just as dogmatic as anybody else on the planet. But science as a social institution really has solved the problem of dogmatism. What we do is we pit scientists against each other, basically. I come up with my theory, and then Joe over there, or Mary has her theory, and I'm not trying to disprove my theory, but Mary's trying to disprove my theory, and I'm trying to disprove her theory. That's how science progresses. We don't take our theories as the dogmatic final truth. We take them as the best ideas we have so far. Let's push them to their limits and see where they break. And what they tell us.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the difference between science and scientism. That is it right there. Dogmatic scientism making facts fit the theory, opposed to real science making the theory fit the facts. Next question I have, Doc, is, and I think I mentioned this backstage a little bit also, could the underlying fundamental conscious agents that tend to run reality, and again, this would be another hour's worth of talk to explain conscious agents, but assuming our audience has done that bit of research, could these underlying fundamentals change our perception of reality? For instance, we perceive something one way, and later on, we're perceiving it a way that is, according to history, never been. Could that be theoretically possible within your concept of consciousness, within your framework?
Well, yes, since space and time are not the fundamental reality, right?
Right.
And they're just a data structure that certain conscious agents use as a simplifying interface to other conscious agents, then yes, you could tinker with the data structure, right? So absolutely. So whereas if, when we thought that space and time were the fundamental reality, and there they are, and we thought of consciousness as being just a latecomer, right? So the Big Bang was 13.8 billion years ago, and there were no living things back then near the Big Bang, much less any conscious things, at least in one story of it. And it took millions, hundreds of millions of years, or even billions of years perhaps, for the first flickers of life to come on. And then after that, who knows how long before the first flickers of consciousness came onto the scene. And so in that framework, the idea that consciousness could be affecting the fundamental nature of space and time is just absurd, right? No chance in that framework. But in a framework in which we realize, well, no, space-time is not fundamental, and we're playing with the idea that consciousness is fundamental. Again, by the way, I'm not dogmatic about that either. I'll just say this right up front. I expect my theories to be overthrown. I'm hoping to be alive to see it. That's the goal, right? So it's a hypothesis that consciousness is fundamental, and our theory is a mathematically precise statement of that hypothesis. Now, under that hypothesis, then yes, space-time is just a headset that certain agents use to simplify. I mean, if there's billions of agents out there, actually more than billions, countless agents out there. I can't deal with a countless number of agents. What do? I have to simplify it. That's what space and time is. I can see Cynthia, I can see Shane, I can see Christopher, and so forth. There are many conscious agents that I just, they're lovely, they're wonderful. I'd be pleased to meet them, but I can't do it, right? You can only shake so many hands in one lifetime. So space-time is just a headset. So once we get a model of what a first baby step beyond space-time, think about what that's going to open up to us. It's going to be incredible, right? Maxwell's equations opened up all of the current technology that we're using, electronic communication.
Would
wireless
you say
communication.
this would open up the science of the paranormal, in your opinion?
Right, but it would no longer be called paranormal because we'd have mathematics. So it would just be science, right? 1800, what we're doing right now would be called paranormal, right? This would just be, there's no way in Newton for this to be really to be conceivable, to be doing this. And so it will just be science. So what we don't want, of course, are things where we're making claims that are dogmatic. That's what we don't want. So no one wants that. So, but here's what we'll be able to do. One problem we have right now in space travel is that there's all these galaxies and stars out there that we can see. There's trillions of stars and hundreds of billions of galaxies. It turns out most of those galaxies that we can see, we could never get there. If we travel through space and time, we could never get there, even if we went at the speed of light, which is as fast as you can go through space-time. They're going away faster than the speed of light. So it's really strange. Even though no object can go through space-time faster than the speed of light, space-time itself can expand faster than the speed of light. So there's all this real estate that's waving at us, and we can never get to it. That's if we go through space-time. But now, what if we realize that space-time is not fundamental? It's just a data structure. And we have now the mathematics of the next level beyond it, of conscious agents. And we understand how these conscious agents create space-time as a data structure. And we have the equations. Well, then we can pull a Maxwell, right? All the technology that came from Maxwell, maybe instead of going to Proxima Centauri through space, we can just go around space. And I'm not talking about wormholes. I'm talking about something utterly not tied to our thinking about inside space and time. We will be just like if you are a software engineer and you have this Grand Theft Auto virtual reality game. Well, if you're a software engineer, you could take someone's tires off their car and not even know, they wouldn't know why that happened. Well, there's some geek outside of the Grand Theft Auto headset who's playing with the software and just took the tires off your car and took the gas out of your tank, or all of a sudden just moved you from here to there. In other words, once we go beyond space-time and get a mathematical model, say, of conscious agents beyond space-time, then if prior history of science is any guide, new technologies will come out of it that right now would look no different than a miracle. They're just indistinguishable from a miracle. So that's where I think we're headed. But then it won't be called paranormal any more than this. What we're doing right now is called paranormal. It would just be called the next step in science. And that's where I see, hopefully, the profitable interaction between science and spirituality, where we really listen to each other. Scientists now, I mean, there was good reason for scientists to stick with space-time for all these centuries. There was a good reason for it, but we've done that now, and now it's time for us to move on, and so we can now listen to each other and use the tools that science has come up with that really put the curb on dogmatism. Again, individual scientists are dogmatic, but science as a social institution is not. It will take, by the way, to let go of space-time. It's going to take, it's not going to happen overnight. So our theories tell us that space-time is doomed. My generation is going to have to die. That's how we move on. My generation will die, and the younger generation that's really excited about the stuff beyond space-time will go out there and explore it. So that's how science as a social institution moves on. Most of us can't let go of what we deeply believed and all of our lives. It's too much for us. But the younger folks are very, very happy to say that the old folks were wrong all along.
You can't comprehend a color you've never seen.
Right.
So essentially, to kind of sum up what you've been saying in layman's terms, are you kind of saying that most people are looking within the headset at the brain to see how it's creating the headset, but you're saying, hey, let's look and see how the headset, which is consciousness, is creating the brain, and the brain's only just another icon on the desktop to represent something, to make it to break it down into an easier way of understanding it. So you're talking about, you're trying to do essentially what I was asking, trying to get to that level of the headset, I guess. And when you do that, you see that, oh, well, the brain is actually just another subset of consciousness, right?
That's exactly right. So instead of starting with brains and trying to boot up consciousness, which most of my good friends and colleagues are doing, I'm saying we have to start with consciousness, and then we have to boot up not only brains, but the space-time in which brains exist. And in my talk next week to these quantum theorists and cognitive neuroscientists, I'm going to propose precisely how that happens. I mean, I'll say it, but I'll just put out the words. But so if you take the dynamics of conscious agents and just look at their long-term behavior, sort of like in Twitter, if you're looking not at each individual tweet, but you're looking at trends, right? What's really trend? So that's sort of the big picture kind of thing. So if you look at the big picture, what we call the asymptotic dynamics of the conscious agents, then it turns out that can be described by permutations. The mathematical structures by permutations and combinations of permutations, convex combinations of, and that turns out to lead to these structures called Birkhoff polytopes. And these Birkhoff polytopes turn out to be cells of this bigger structure called the positive Grossmanian. And then it turns out the positive Grossmanian, if you do a linear transformation, it gives you the amplituhedron that the physicists have found beyond space-time. So, and then they show, if you have that amplituhedron, how it projects down into space-time. They've done that work. So what I'm hoping to do, and then I'll have lunch. No, it's going to be quite a long time. But what my team and I are working on is to show how we start with the dynamics of conscious agents, and its asymptotic behavior gives rise to the amplituhedron and the cosmological polytopes that the physicists are founding. So we then can use all the good work that they've done. They've used their flashlight from inside space-time to point into the dark behind space-time. We're using this bold assumption that consciousness is fundamental, and we're trying to have the two meet. So here's consciousness. If you take its asymptotics, we're finding the same structures that you're finding working backwards from space-time. So maybe we can connect and show how consciousness then goes all the way and creates space-time. So that's what we're up to. And that's sort of the fun. But it won't be done before lunch.
And consciousness, our perception of the world, our consciousness. A lot of us have noticed there are different things that are being perceived by all of us that are not what history says they are. And we went through quite a bit of pretty deep and heavy information. Now we have some fun stuff I would like to get into. It's been an honor to hear all of your work, Doctor. I could actually sit and talk to you for the next 6 hours and still feel like I've got so much more to talk about. So, and I'm sure every one of us here could too. But now that we went through the deep sciences and the consciousness, and you have agreed that the underlying conscious agents, very well, the data structure could be changed. I would like to present to you some questions that may prove to you that the data structure very well has been changed. Okay. This is something we like to do here. Heather, if you wouldn't mind going ahead. And for those that know my friend Heather, My Life DIY, this is a different Heather. I want to be clear. I had this question quite a bit lately. These are two different people. There's a place in New York, a station, I guess, or a terminal, or it's called Grand Central something. What do you remember?
I would see Grand Central Station, but
so the picture we're seeing here is what we're always been told is Grand Central Station.
Yeah.
However, come to find out, it's always been called Grand Central Terminal. The station does exist still. It's underneath. It's the subway underneath the terminal here. So yes, a lot of people remember this being Grand Central Station. Go ahead, Cynthia.
I remember station. Yeah. And when I went to New York, everybody was calling it Grand Central Station, I thought. So to hear that it's always been called terminal is just weird to me.
And it's like etched in the stone of the place in the outside. Grand Central Terminal always has been. Never been there myself, though.
Weird.
So this one's a little strange, but this is only the first one of a series in the quiz here. Again, there's no wrong answers, by the way, sir. So you won't fail the quiz. A man as smart as you, I don't expect would fail anyway. But go on to the next one, if you would. The DEA. We've all heard of this. This is the Drug Enforcement. What, sir?
I would have thought agency.
Drug Enforcement Agency. That's what I've always been told. It's administration, isn't it, folks?
Administration.
Yeah, no,
Okay, I was guessing if I was wrong about agency, it must be administration.
I know. Wacky.
And
It should be
administration
special
to enforce
administrator,
drugs.
right?
But a lot of people that I know, and most people remember this being Drug Enforcement Agency, not administration.
I would not call these individuals administrators in any. I mean, that doesn't sound right. I mean, something's wrong with it. Just sounds weird that it's administration to me.
Yeah, they're enforcement agents. They aren't administrators that make the law. Next on the list, folks. This is one that I'm not really 100 on myself. There's a little fun one here. Speaking of fun, Funyuns. Which way do you remember this being spelled, sir? Or are you even a fan of this particular treat?
I've never heard of them before, so this is something I've never had.
And that's quite
I just
okay.
wanted to-
So again, there's no wrong answer. A lot of people remember the onion Funyun spelling that we have in example A. However, if you'll go to the scroll down to the next one, it turns out it was actually a Y the whole time.
I think it would be
Interesting.
funny, you know.
It's funny. Yeah, it is kind of funny.
Onions, right.
So in 1996, there was an act, medical act called HIPAA. Do you remember this, sir?
Yes.
Okay, so HIPAA, how was the acronym spelled? Are you aware of this?
There I'm going back and forth between 1A and 2A's, but so I don't know if it's 1A or 2A. So I just have to say that's where I sit on it. I don't know.
Okay, and that's an honest answer.
Yeah.
A lot of people remember it being HIPAA
Okay.
or PPA. I'm sorry.
Or yeah, HIPPA.
HIPPA, HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability Protection Act. That's what I remember.
Okay, so I was not even close to being right.
However, that's not what it is.
Oh, I was close to being right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you agree with what is supposed to have always been true.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I just didn't know if there was. Yeah, I didn't think there was 2 P's, but I didn't know if there was 1 or 2 A's.
Oh, okay.
It flipped-flopped, actually. It went from 2 P's to now 2 A's. A lot of people remember being HIPPA. It's always been HIPAA.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting. So we knew there was something double. We got it wrong.
Right.
That's fair. It also changed the entire name of the act.
Right.
Yeah.
As a professor and as a student, I'm sure you've used a lot of whiteout, sir.
Of course, not since electronics. So it's been probably 20 or 30 years. But yeah, I used whiteout 30 years ago. Sure.
Okay. So do you remember which one of these spellings do you remember correctly, or which would be?
I don't, but I would have guessed the WHITE would be my guess.
And not only a guess, the entirety or the majority, I would say, of the community would agree with you.
Yeah.
However, reality says it is WITE.
Okay.
Yeah. It actually needs some whiteout. The cleverness of it, right?
Next up on the list, we have a very common household product. It's the spelling of this last word here that's in question.
Oh, liquid plumber.
Yes, sir.
PL. I would have guessed 2 M's and an ER. So MMER would be my guess, but I'm not sure.
I remember it being PLUMBR, plumber. You know, it's a little fun play on words. And a lot of the community agrees with that. However, reality says that it is actually PLUMR.
That's a weird one.
Wow.
And these are just little fun ones. Again, they're little nothing definitive about these specifically. Do you
Well,
remember? And I'm going to jump off the quiz here. I'm going to go with my own real quick, and I do apologize, folks. I'm going off the cuff here. Do you remember Jiffy peanut butter, sir?
Basically, yeah. I only had it once or twice in my whole life, but yeah.
Yeah, but you would agree Jiffy was a peanut butter brand.
Yeah, I would have thought of, yeah, I think I remember Jiffy peanut butter, sure.
Okay, so about 10 years ago, I went to the store to get some Jiffy, and I found that it had a new logo as Jif, J-I-F. They dropped the F-Y. Come to find out that Jiffy has never existed, sir. It's always in our lifetime in Jif.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. No, I would have thought of Jiffy. I would have sworn that it was Jiffy, yeah.
So I do apologize for jumping off the cuff. That's a classic one in the community. If you go back to the slides again, please. Excellent. Thank you, ma'am. What year did the new USA nickel debut?
I have no idea. 1955?
No, I'd say it's closer to 2006, apparently, according to this. I'm not sure the actual question on this one. I'm going to be honest with you. This isn't my particular cup of tea on this particular one.
Okay.
The American Gothic painting, are you familiar with it?
Is that the guy with the pitchfork? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. There he is. Right.
Okay. So the question here is, who is depicted in this painting?
I always assumed it was some kind of farmers.
The farmer, and who would this lady be? His.
I assumed I never paid attention, but I would assume it was a farmer and his wife or something like that.
What about the way they're facing? Is this the way you was? Do you remember her facing forward or to the side like this, or does it seem odd to you?
I don't, but nothing here makes me feel like this has been doctored. So I don't. There's nothing that stands out and says this is doctored somehow. So
okay.
If someone said this is the real thing, I wouldn't have disagreed.
So if we go on to the next slide, this is actually his daughter.
His daughter, okay.
And I'm with Shane. I remember her looking forward, like into the
and being older
camera,
too. Yeah.
if you will. Yeah. So that's all we have for this particular little quiz, but at least one or two we have found that the good doctor is definitely Mandela Effect. My grandson wants to say hi.
Hi.
All right, Bubby.
Congratulations, grandson.
So essentially, it's like in your theory of things just being a representation or an icon. It's like people are experiencing the icons in their reality shifting into something different than they remembered, and it happens in a retroactive way to where they can say, well, it looks different now, but at least when I was a kid it was this way, and then they go look at a picture, and in the picture it's changed too. In the Patreon video, I was telling you about the thinker for me, the thinker to the forehead, and I found an image with 16 softball students that were all posed around the statue with their fist to their forehead. But the statue, it changed. So they were all, and you're talking 8-10-year-old kids, they were just looking up at it, mimicking it, and then posing like they saw it. However, the statue looks like it's changed, but these conscious agents, if you will, didn't change or didn't get what you would think of as Mandela affected or shifted. So really, that's kind of the strangeness of this whole thing, and I think it really ties into your work about how what we're seeing isn't even real anyway. It's a representation of something going on. Yeah.
That's right. So to understand these effects, we could try to understand the way our interface works, the way we organize our conceptual ideas, our words, and interfaces always simplify things. And you try not to do so. If I put on an evolutionary hat, for example, use evolutionary theory for a moment, right? You would. So that's now I'm doing a theory inside the interface, but we can talk about it inside. We could then try to talk about it outside the interface with consciousness. But inside, you would say, well, there are selection pressures to do things fast and cheap, right? So you're going to take shortcuts. You'll have heuristics. You'll have biases. You'll have assumptions that are built into you, right? So, and if you didn't have all these, you would be just too hard. It would just be too much work. And so we just and simplifying things. So I don't know if you guys heard of jewel beetle. So I'll just give you one idea about how we simplify things. So, and how we mistake things. So there's this beetle called the jewel beetle that lives in the outback of Western Australia. They're dimpled, glossy, and brown. And the males fly, the females are flightless. And the males fly around looking for females. And when a male finds one that's eligible, he alights and mates. Well, in the outback of Western Australia, there's also Homo sapiens. And the males of that species like to drink beer. And they had these bottles called stubbies. And they would toss their stubbies out into the outback when they were driving and done with them. And it turned out the stubbies were dimpled, glossy, and exactly the right shade of brown to grab the fancy of these beetles. So what happened was all the male jewel beetles flock all over these bottles, trying to mate. Now, talk about the ultimate Mandela effect. These beetles have been mating with females for hundreds of thousands of years. You would think, surely evolution has shaped the male jewel beetle to know what a female is. No. Apparently, what evolution gave them was a simple trick or hack. A female is anything dimpled, glossy, and brown, the bigger the better. And so they don't know what a female is. And some women may say the same thing about men. But anyway, so the male beetles don't know what a female really is. They just have this little heuristic that was fine in their niche. And this heuristic allowed them to go and mate. But as soon as you put a dimpled, glossy, brown bottle out there, the species almost went extinct. So what's remarkable is the males are crawling all over the bottle trying to mate. And they cannot figure out that the female is over there. And so they're stuck on. So that's the ultimate Mandela effect. So from within a evolutionary framework, you would use the idea that we have heuristics and shortcuts to do things on the cheap. That would be one way to think about it. But then that should be, now from the broader framework in which space-time is doomed, we would then want a theory about how consciousness works more generally, right? And in that more general theory about consciousness, which, by the way, you only have evolution and evolutionary theory when you have limited resources. If we didn't have to compete, right, that's the fundamental. So, but suppose that in the area of consciousness, there is no limited resource. It's unlimited. And in fact, there is no time. The ultimate limited resource that we have is time. It turns out that the theory that I'm working on is of that type, so that the conscious agents are a dynamical system, but there is no time in the sense of increasing entropy. There is what we call no entropic time in the consciousness, but it's a theorem that you take this dynamics of consciousness, it's a Markovian dynamics, if you take a conditional probability, project it, in the projection, you will get entropic time as an artifact of the projection. So what may come out is that evolutionary theory, which I love, I've spent a lot of time studying it, it's a beautiful theory. The entire theory may be an artifact of looking at a world in which there are no limited resources, this world of consciousness, there's no limited resources, there is no time, and maybe there's cooperation, there's no competition whatsoever. But when you project that onto a particular view, then you get entropic time, you get the artifact of limited resources, and you get what appears to be competition. So there may be this deeper, so that's how the science works, right? By the way, for me to say that is one thing. To then show that this dynamics, literally when you project it in the way that I said, through the permutations and Birkhoff polytopes and Grassmannians and amplitude, when you do that projection of the dynamics of consciousness, I better get back evolution by natural selection when I look at it inside the projection in space-time. So that way I can't just be talking through my hat. I have to actually do that. And I have to get physics coming out of it and so forth. So that's why it's not going to be done before lunch. But there may be this deeper theory of consciousness that will then give us new insights that I talked about from the point of view of evolution, right? From the point of view of evolution, we're talking about heuristics and shortcuts and things, trying to do things on the fly, quickly on the fly, because time is a limited resource. There are all these limited resources in competition. That's why we'd have these Mandela effects with the beer bottle and the Beatles. But there could be a much deeper theory that we don't yet have that explains these, and then predicts brand new ones. But eventually, once we understand them, those won't be paranormal. They'll just be part of the new deeper theory of science, and we'll use them to do technologies that will look miraculous to us today.
Do you see a world in which enough conscious agents could put enough intention into something that they could shift something within the headset just by becoming a consensus reality or something consciously or even unconsciously?
Well, I think the kind of thing that we try to do, where we just like sit and meditate or have global meditations, can have some effect. But we found even deeper ways to collaborate and cooperate. And science is one of them, right? And with science, what we've done is something that, again, in 1800 would have seemed miraculous. You mean that when a bunch of people really cooperate, put their heads to it, they could make it such that I could talk to 5 people, four other people across hundreds of miles, thousands of miles instantaneously and have a conversation, and we'd understand each other? Well, that's what you can do when people really cooperate, and science as well as spirituality is a spiritual endeavor when you think about it. Really, everything, if consciousness is fundamental, everything we do is a spiritual endeavor. We're under the illusion that physics and space-time was fundamental, but that may be part of what consciousness is up to. And that is, I should say one thing about consciousness. If I'm saying consciousness is fundamental and it's dynamic, the obvious question is, okay, then what is consciousness doing and why? What is consciousness up to, right? If you have a scientific theory, what is consciousness doing? I mean, if it's doing something, why is it doing that as opposed to something else? And of course, any scientific theory that takes consciousness as fundamental is going to have to answer that question, right? We're going to have, it doesn't mean that we're going to answer it right, but we do have to answer it. And I've only seen one idea that seems deep enough to try to answer that question. And again, comes from Gödel's incompleteness theorem, right? Because Gödel says there's no end to the exploration of mathematical structure in principle. And if consciousness is all there is, then mathematics is only about consciousness. And that means there's no end to the exploration of consciousness. And so maybe that's what consciousness is up to. What consciousness is doing is what the Oracle of Delphi had outside of his temple, right? Know thyself was the inscription, one of 3 inscriptions. Know thyself. Maybe that's what consciousness is up to. And Gödel asserts, Gödel's incompleteness theorem tells us that this endeavor is in principle unending. There is no end to it, because there is no end to the exploration of mathematical structures. So in that, I think we will find all sorts of, as we do that exploration, we'll find all sorts of what we call paranormal effects, but that eventually will just become part of everyday normal science as our theories progress and become more and more sophisticated. So, but the goal is, the attitude is not to disparage the current theories that don't explain these effects. That's not useful. Because if you think about it, our current scientific theories are just the best tools we have so far. So anybody who wants to take the next step cannot do it until they master at least parts of the current theories. I mean, it's too hard. It's too complicated. So what you have to do is pay your respect to the current theory, and then you transcend it. Then you get to the point where you can begin to go beyond it and find a deeper theory that explains what we or predicts new effects that we would call paranormal now, but eventually we'll understand, no, that's how consciousness works, and we've got the theory for it. That is how consciousness works.
Speaking of questions, we've got a lot of questions coming in the chat. Go ahead, guys, start throwing your questions in there for the good doctor, as this has been a lot of information to take in that I am very well aware of myself. What an amazing conversation we've had so far. Chris, you've been really, really quiet. Would you like to add anything, sir, before we run to the chat questions?
Yeah, so Don, what's your opinion of the concept of the holographic universe?
It's really interesting on a couple levels. So it's a fact within Einstein's theory of gravity that's been sketched out by Stephen, it was just, really studied by Stephen Hawking. He showed that with a black hole, the amount of information you can store inside a black hole does not vary with the volume of the black hole. It varies only with the surface area of the black hole. And that's stunning, right? The amount of information you can stick into a black hole has nothing to do with its volume, it has to do with its surface area. That's really counterintuitive. And then they found, going further, that that's true of any region of space. If I want to stick, I can store into that space, it has nothing to do with the volume, it has to do with the area of the space around it. Now, if that sounds crazy, you really sit with that, because it is crazy making when you think about it. We thought that we think of volumes of space as real. What this is saying is no, they cannot hold information. Now, so that holographic principle seems to be a true fact about our space-time. And there's another kind of notion of holography that's come out, in which it's called the ADS-CFT correspondence in physics. So this is also a holographic thing where they show that if you have a quantum field theory without gravity, it's equivalent to a theory with gravity in a dimension higher. So you can have so that's another holographic kind of principle, and that's also quite interesting. But it's true. What they found, they can only do it for something called anti-de Sitter space, which is not our universe. So that holographic principle is only for anti-de Sitter space. We live in de Sitter space, and it's turned out to be harder, but not, I think, not impossible to try to get to start to get an analog of it for de Sitter space. But the one limitation of that holographic principle is that you have a hologram of space, but the time on the boundary is exactly the same as the time in the higher dimensional space, what they call the bulk. So it's not a true hologram, because the time is the same in both. So so the holographic principle, you can see that it's complicated, but it's really fascinating, and it does point to the idea that space-time has the feeling of just a data structure. It's not the final reality. It's a data structure that we can play with, and now physics is actually going beyond that data structure and finding what's beyond it.
Very cool. And I do have one more question, because I've heard you talk about something called hemiachromatopsia, which I think is very interesting, about how because we were talking about magnetism and color.
Right.
Can you just explain that a little bit to the audience? Because I have some thoughts about that, but I wanted to hear what you have to say about that.
Right. So it's hemiachromatopsia. It's if you have a stroke, say, in your left hemisphere of your brain, roughly back here, area called area V4 of visual cortex. What will happen is you will lose all color experience in the right half of your visual world. So everything to the left of where you're looking will be in color, but everything to the right will just be in black and white. So I have a red apple over here. It looks nice and red. Now it's half red and half gray, and now it's just gray. So it's like looking at a black and white television kind of picture on the right. So and you can do this with transcranial magnetic stimulation. So you can take a magnet, but you don't do this at home. This is very, very dangerous because you can burn your brain. But you can take a magnet and touch it outside your skull, literally. So it's not invasive. You just touch your skull with it, turn on the magnet, And if it's in the right place, and you can inhibit V4, and then you can actually experience the color drain out of your right half of the world. And when you turn off the magnet, the color comes flowing back in. So this would be, by the way, taken as good evidence that the brain causes your color experiences, right? Because look, when I play with V4, I'm playing with your conscious experiences. So all game over, man. The brain is making your conscious experiences. But so anyway.
Yeah, because I thought that was really interesting how it's related to magnetism. And then there's also, I've heard discussions about how Earth's magnetic fields have been weakening and changing. And then there's something, the counter thing is called chromatopsia, which is where you can perceive more colors. And I thought that was really interesting too, because like for myself, I feel like colors are becoming more vibrant. Without, you know, having a stroke or drug induced or anything like that. I've also experienced the same type of thing. Have you ever heard of something called a Lucia light?
I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar.
Yes, this light that you sit under, and it's just flashes. It's just white light. It flashes at different frequencies and different times and patterns. You close your eyes when you're under it, and you see these vibrant colors that you can't even. It's like purple is like a neon purple. It's just so amazing. So it's just very interesting, that aspect about how our brain can interpret the world around us, because what we only see like 1% of the light spectrum, right? 99% is invisible to our human eyes.
Yeah, only from 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers roughly is the wavelengths that we can see. Everything else beyond that, we can't see it at all. And yes, I think that also, I think with drugs, some people experience colors that they might not see at other times, and vibrant colors. And I myself experienced, you know, with meditation, you can walk around in a meditative state where you let go of all thought. And when I'm walking with literally no thought at all, then the world looks just more alive. The colors are more vibrant, and you just experience something that you don't experience when you're lost in your mind chatter. So it's really, I mean, my own firsthand experience is that I'm not saying that I see new colors, but they do feel more vibrant, and more saturated and more alive when I let go of the mind chatter. Which by the way, you know, we need both. We need theories that are mind stuff, right? The mathematical theories, and then we need to go beyond the mind to a much deeper intelligence and go back and forth, learn how to let go of thought, to go to a really deep intelligence to get ideas, and then come back into thought, turn them into mathematics, where we can make our next baby step in our science. And so consciousness itself will always transcend any of our scientific theories. And we can never know consciousness through our theories, but we can know consciousness because we are conscious. So by being conscious, and the best way to really know it, not just cognitively, but to know it at a deep level, is to go into entire interior silence and to let go of all conceptual systems whatsoever. And so I think that the scientists in the next generation will be the really effective ones, will be the ones that really start to combine science and spirituality in that way, where it's not just an idea, you use the insights from spirituality, letting go of thought genuinely gets you in touch with a deeper intelligence that will really help you in your next conceptual move in theory making. And going back and forth between those is somehow part of the big dance of what consciousness is really up to in trying to understand itself. It needs to go through all these forms to put itself in a headset, to let itself get lost in the headset, and then to wake up and to realize, as beautiful as this headset is, and I was like, billions of light years across, trillions of stars, hundreds of billions of galaxies, unbelievable. What, you know, over the top. This was over the top, and yet that's just my headset. I'm not that. And so that's what consciousness is doing, is basically trying on new headsets, getting lost in them, and then waking up and going, oh wow, I learned a lot from that experience, and I transcend that. And so there's going to be this back and forth between, you know, where the really good scientists, I think, will be like, I think maybe Einstein was doing a lot too, because he would just go into these non-conceptual spaces where he would talk about, it wasn't thought, It was most like loose images and so forth. And it would take him a long time to take his insights and bring them back into mathematics. And that's the way I think good science goes, is you go into no thought,
Yeah.
tap this infinite intelligence, you come back, you of course, you've done your homework, you've studied all the science, you know, so I'm not saying to be lazy bone, you have to study all that stuff. It's only the prepared mind that can even understand at a conceptual level the new insights that you're getting from going. So that's going to be a back and forth so there won't be a science versus spirituality. It will be that the best scientists actually have a deep spiritual practice that takes them into touch with this deeper infinite intelligence. That is you.
Thank
Love
you.
it.
I appreciate that. That's a great answer. Thank you.
And our audience is very, very, very intrigued and has been intrigued this entire time, just like ourselves, listening on the edges of their seats and learning a lot. And there's some questions we have from our audience. I'm going to start out with Mr. G. He's been very active in this conversation, seems to be a very big fan of your work, Doc. He says, what is Don's favorite sci-fi book?
Oh, I've liked a lot of different sci-fi movies and so forth. In terms of books, I haven't read a lot, but I've read some that are like C.S. Lewis's. They're wonderful little books. I've read some of them to my grandkids and
The
so
Narnia
forth.
books?
Yeah, the Chronicles of Narnia and
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Right. So they're those are fun. You know, there's lots of movies and so forth, but books, I would say, yeah, the favorite would be, because C.S. Lewis. I mean, no one can write better than C.S. Lewis. He writes, his writing is incredible. It's just beautiful. I study C.S. Lewis just to learn how to write. So
There we go. So C.S. Lewis's work, good answer, Doc. I like C.S.'s too. He actually writes a lot of spiritual undertoned work, I've found. If you look at it from certain angles, like the lion being Jesus and, you know, things like that.
Right. Well, he's explicit about it in his other work, right? He wrote a book called Mere Christianity, right? So he's very explicit. he wasn't hiding anything, right? So, and I think that he gives one of the best defenses for Christianity that I've ever seen. I mean, there are places where I take exception, where I think he doesn't get evolution quite right and so forth. But in general, I'm a student of C.S. Lewis and a student of his writing and a student of his heart. I mean, I think that his heart was in a wonderful place.
Speaking of being a student, our next question comes from, I want to make sure I get this person's name right, Rowena Morena. They ask, what are your thoughts on Bobson's conjecture that information has mass? You were speaking of this earlier, a lot of mass into a small area in the black hole. That is actually the dark matter or dark energy that has been such a mystery. What are your thoughts on this concept, Dr. Hoffman?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that information and energy can be converted into each other. There have been experiments in which you do that. It's takeoffs on Maxwell's demon kind of idea, but where you can actually do it. And so. And we know from Einstein that energy and mass are the same thing. So when we get this equivalence between information and energy, we can actually convert information into energy and vice versa. Then yeah, absolutely. Then information has mass too. Again, that's within our physical science framework. So with the space-time framework. Now so it's absolutely true within, you know, when we bring quantum theory and you know, Einstein's theory together, then yes, information has mass, and I think we have baby technologies now for converting information into energy and vice versa. But we will eventually, I think, have engines that do this, and this will be a powerful resource. So absolutely, it's in its baby stages, but I think there'll be technologies that come out of it. But when we go beyond space-time, then the notion of information is very, there's no notion of mass beyond space-time, right? So it's going to be, we can still talk about energy, information out there and consciousness, and we'll have to then look at the projection of all that back into space-time to get back to the equivalence with mass. So it'll be a far more interesting and complicated connection between information and mass when we go outside of space-time and use the concept of information to talk about the dynamics of consciousness.
And I'm curious about the idea of the information in the black hole too. But again, I could talk for hours with you about these things. Back to our audience's questions, because I've had enough time to ask questions today. Our next question comes from Morgan Hanamso, and I do apologize if I messed up the name. Says, is conscious agent systems what is the status of mathematics? Is consciousness more fundamental than math?
That's a great question. Right now, I view it as, and again, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just telling you where my current thoughts are on this. Right. This is a very deep issue. I'm viewing it as an essential and integral part of what I call consciousness. But this is a very deep issue, and it gets to something that the spiritual traditions have talked about for a long time, where they talk about the form and the formless, and the interaction between the form and the formless, right? And so we'll see. I think mathematics is something about the form of things, and there is no end to mathematical structure, as Gödel points out. So that's why I reached the conclusion that consciousness itself is infinitely deep and infinitely wise. So that's a statement about the form. Consciousness itself is no less than the form, but it could completely transcend even the mathematical structures that we can talk about. And that may be the case, in which case consciousness would be more fundamental than math. But my guess is that my guess is that somehow both are essentially intertangled with each other. That consciousness somehow needs form to understand itself, if only to say, I am not that. One way to know yourself is to know that you're not that, and to go through the endless ways that you're not that. So I would have. So you can see, I'm not giving you a final answer on it, but I'm saying that that's such a deep question that there are different directions that I'm thinking about it. So yeah, great question.
Excellent question. Our audience has stumped Dr. Donald Hoffman. That's something we don't get very often, is a stumped guest on audience questions or any questions. So well done, audience. That's something I didn't think I'd see. I could definitely take that in a number of ways too. I would argue just momentarily that the math would be yet another construct within space-time. Math has been called a way to understand the mind of God. This would be a way to understand the fundamental consciousness, at least my opinion on the subject. And last but not least, we've got time for one more question, and we've really run a little over on time. So I really like this. Gidris, I think these people are making these names just to mess with me at this point. Gidris Messiacus, again, apologies if I ruined this name. What video games or movies are closest to the interface theory topic? Is there anything in pop culture that one could watch to get a good idea of the framework that you have presented and concepted?
Well, yeah, there are several that do a good job. Several movies that do a good job. Let me think of. So The Matrix is one, right, with Keanu Reeves. And what's good about The Matrix is that it really gives you the idea how everything that you perceive around you could just be in your head, right? Just fed to you. and you wouldn't know it, and you would believe it, and waking up out of that would be incredibly scary, as it was for Neo in the Matrix, at least at first. Now, the downside of the Matrix, in terms of what I'm saying, is that when Neo comes out of the Matrix, the world he's in is a space-time world, right? So you never really get out of space-time. You just and what I'm saying is that space-time itself is not fundamental. So to get out of the Matrix, we're gonna have to go even more scary than it was for Neo. It's gonna be unrecognizable. It's not space and time anymore. It's not objects inside space and time. And in fact, there could be countless other interfaces that are utterly unlike anything that we've seen in space and time. Countless. And so what we take as to be the final reality is just one flavor out of countless numbers of flavors of kinds of interfaces. And so I think the Matrix is good because it will shake you up about what you see. But it doesn't shake you up enough, because when Neo pops out of the Matrix, he's just in space and time, and we really need to pop out. But how do you? I mean, now with a nod to the filmmakers, how do you show something beyond space and time? That's that's not easy.
Going back to what you were saying about color as a follow-up, is it possible that we could see things in dream states and stuff that just our interface can't interpret, and so it's just like nothingness? It's unrecognizable data, just because, like the color situation you mentioned, if we don't know what we're seeing, sort of like a newborn when they first open their eyes, right? If we're able to see into other headsets, as you talk about, would that even be something that you would consider in your research?
Right. So you're absolutely right that if you don't have a conceptual system to record the thing with, then you may not even remember it, right? If something, it just is so different from anything that you know so for example, often when people meditate and they go into a place of no thought, there's nothing to remember. So it's just like nothing happened, and you don't remember anything. So time can pass very, very quickly. So you're not counting things or anything like that. So yes. I'll just stop with that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I said I have one last question. I was wrong. I had two last questions. The last question is one that we would ask anyway. Where can we find more of your current streams or post of talks or roundtables, Doctor? You mentioned you're going to be part of a upcoming conference. Will that be streamed?
Yes, it will be.
So where can we find it? We had it earlier. Where can people find your work, your recent work?
Right. So probably what I try to do is on my Twitter feed. When there's something coming up, I usually post a link so that people can go to it if they want to when it's live, or get the video afterwards. So I just posted a few days ago a link to this upcoming. It's a technical conference. Now this is, but it is free, so anybody can sign up for the Zoom and get in and watch it. But this is technical, so people will be throwing out math, assuming that you know it, and so forth. So, but if you're interested in that, so my Twitter handle is @Donald D. Hoffman, Hoffman. So @Donald D. Hoffman, all one word, is my Twitter handle, and you can, if you go there, you can see what's coming up, but also get links to all of my past podcasts. And I have more than 50 podcasts, so there's lots of podcasts out there that you can look up. If you just Google my name on podcast, you can get a bunch of podcasts.
And if you Google his name in YouTube or on Google, trust me, there is a list of information to be had. Any final thoughts you would like to leave with our audience, Mr. Hoffman?
Well, I would just say that I applaud this kind of interaction that you're fostering between science and spirituality. I think that this is the future, that both scientists and spiritual people will be stunned at what comes out of the collaboration over the decades and centuries ahead. It will go in ways that we didn't expect, and things that we assumed were true will will turn out not to be true. And we should be, go for the ride, enjoy the ride, and expect to be surprised and learn and get new miracle technologies that come out of it, as well as personal growth. So it's going to be interesting ahead.
Anybody else like to add anything? Cynthia, you're muted.
It's funny. Just thanking you so much for joining us today and for your words of inspiration, which I think are deep and profound. And hopefully people will get a chance to play this back and listen again, because I think there was enough material here to be worth it for most people.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Cynthia. It was a real pleasure. And thank you all for your kind invitation. This was very, very kind of you.
It's been a pleasure for me. Definitely.
It's been a pleasure and honor for us all. I can guarantee we are huge fans and follow your work very closely. Every last one of us here.
Absolutely.
Our next show coming up, folks, is going to be June 29th. As always, we've got something special planned. Cynthia, go ahead.
Yes, geobiologist Rory Duff will be joining us and continuing a conversation about science and spirit with marvelous new directions that most of us may have never thought of. So it'll be the same time, starting at 2:00 Eastern.
I do believe he does some work on ley lines. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, guys, we got a heck of a show next month. I, again, would like to thank Dr. Hoffman for taking the time out of his day to join us here to have such an amazing conversation. It's been, again, an honor and a pleasure for every last one of us. So thank you, sir, on behalf of all of us here at IMEC.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much. That's right.
And with that said, folks, on behalf of Christopher Anatra, the quantum businessman, Shane Robinson, Unbiased and on the Fence, Cynthia Sue Larson of Reality Shifters, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. Together we are the International Mandela Effect Conference. And until June 29th, folks, remember, together we go, together we grow. Good night, everybody.